I've got another ghost story as well. Slightly different, but to me it was informative. When I was 15 or 16, possibly as young as 14, there was a little gang of us, and we found a house that was abandoned and derelict. No electricity, no running water. There was a long greenhouse attached to the back of the property, and a large area of garden and grass that was overgrown. I mean, obviously it was a complete wreck site, but to a bunch of about 10 kids, it was a fantastic place to hang out. Especially after dark, it was a nice place to go. And being young, I had a kind of a cruel streak, especially when it came to playing jokes on people. Obviously I wasn't alone. I had a friend at the time called Gaz, who was of a similar mind, and we decided that it would be very funny to scare the hell out of everybody else. So we went to the house early on a Saturday afternoon, and we rigged up a lot of traps. It was rather like the sort of thing that you'd pay good money for now, a ghost evening. We had bits of cotton all over the place, so that when people walked through the cotton, they'd break something and it would set off a trap, or we would either Gaz or myself would attract everyone's attention while the other one set off one of the traps. The traps were very, very simple. I can only really remember 2 or 3 of them. The one that I was quite proud of all of them. We spent hours thinking about it and setting it up. We found a mirror that had been broken. The glass was about so big, and because it had been a mirror that had been mounted on a bathroom wall, there were holes drilled in the corners. So we put a piece of thread through one of the holes, took a wooden panel out of the wall, put the glass behind the wall panel, resealed it, ran the cotton up onto a beam, put a screw into the beam and wrapped the cotton around the screw, so that at the appropriate moment I could be leaning nonchalantly against the beam, break the cotton and make a piece of glass fall. It would sound as if it had broken in the room, but of course, no matter how hard the kids looked, they weren't going to find any broken glass. It was particularly effective. There was one kid there who was very calm and very scientific and rational, and Gaz and myself recognised that he was going to be a big problem. And we knew it was almost like we had a script for how the event was going to go. It was I think there's a military equivalent whereby you set off a trap and you recognise that the soldiers will run away from the trap, so you put the more lethal trap where they will all run to. And this is how it worked. The trap that we had lined up for the particularly clever kid was an oil can, a length of electrical cable, not too thick, but malleable. You could bend it into a shape, and we ran the cable loosely around the handle of an oil can, placed the oil can on top of a crate in clear view, ran the electrical cable up into a hole through one of the light fittings, because most of the light fittings had been ripped out, and that went into a room upstairs where most of the traps were to be controlled from. And it was Gaz's part at the right moment to get everyone out of the room, to get them to go downstairs, and to say that he heard something behind a door, and to behave in a very frightened manner. This would make the rational kid push him out of the way, go through the door, announce himself as Tarzan to take on whatever was behind the door, whatever was scaring Gaz, and then he would see the trick that we had lined up for him. And it worked. We knew what this kid would do. We knew that if Gaz pretended to be scared, this lad would step forward. It was so easy to manipulate him. And he went into the room. Gaz, at the right moment, went, "Oh no!" That was my cue, because I remained behind upstairs, to yank on the electrical flex. So the rational kid walked into the room, "Oh no!" and he saw the can fly up into the air and hit the ceiling and come crashing down to the floor. And we even knew that he'd have enough courage to go over to the can to look at it. And he did. But because the flex was only loosely wrapped around the handle, the flex was gone. And it shot up with a lot of force. And he ran. I mean, he was fast. And because he went, everybody else went too, as we knew they would. And we even knew the route they'd take out of the house, through the greenhouse. And we had one last trap in the greenhouse, which was a large can of coffee filled with pebbles, very small stones, which we balanced on top of the greenhouse, so that when we pulled another piece of cotton, it tipped over, and the whole lot came down the slanting glass on top of the greenhouse, making what we thought would be a nice spooky sound. And again, it was very effective. The screams went up a notch. The boys shamefully overtook the girls, which I remember. I don't know how I'm not sure I held my laughter in, but it was simply drowned out by the screams. What was really interesting about that particular event was that at school the next day, after we'd lured them there, we told them ghost stories for a couple of hours before we started setting off the traps. So we set them up completely. But what was interesting was the next day at school, when Gaz and I walked over to the crowd of them spooking the other kids out, they were talking about a giant bat that they'd all seen as they were running through the greenhouse. Now, the only thing that this could have been would have been a stream of pebbles no wider than that running down the glass. Pebbles, there weren't that many in there. It wasn't a solid shape of any description. It was a moving shadow, if anything. But they were talking about a giant bat with about a 10-foot wingspan swooping low over the greenhouse, and they'd all seen it. Or possibly one person said that they'd seen it and the rest of them went yes, yes, or whatever. We didn't go with the kids after they all ran off and went home. So presumably on the way home they were talking themselves into this imagery. But they all swore that they'd seen this thing and stood by it. And when Gaz and I walked up to them after laughing behind our hands for 10 minutes or so and told them that we'd done it and how we'd done it and how we'd planned it, they didn't believe us. Or they didn't want to believe that they'd been fooled. Or they were too scared to go back and let us show them the broken glass behind the wall panels. It was bizarre. It was a hell of a lesson to learn at a young age, that people whose opinions you'd ordinarily trust, who are not liars by any stretch of the imagination, can look you in the eye and tell you that they saw something absolutely clearly, which you know for a fact they did not see. It's I was very, very lucky. I feel a little guilty about that night. I'm sure worse tricks have been pulled on me in the past, but it was so valuable for me to see people who were sane and balanced talking about a giant bat that was actually 30 pebbles on a greenhouse roof.